At the start of 2024, I had a goal to paint and collect as many Iron Hands for Horus Heresy as I could. And here we are, my entire collection, exactly 9,600 points, which is slightly annoying because it's just 400 points away from that crisp 10,000 point limit. I mean, 9,600 is enough, particularly when all of my other legions are between 5 and 6,000 points. Between 5 and 6,000 points, I think, is the sweet spot, because that lets you collect a couple of different rights of war. Rights of war, of course, being the different ways that you can field your legion. And I knew when I started Iron Hands, though, that I wanted more than that 5,000, 6,000 point limit, because they can do so much. My Raven Guard, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, my other legions, they tend to specialize in one or two different directions, but the Iron Hands work very well as an entire legion. The strength of any shooting attack coming into anything with wounds, so all the infantry and the dreadnoughts, is reduced by 1, so I knew I wanted a lot of infantry and dreadnoughts. And Iron Hands vehicles get a 6-up, it will not die, so a small chance to recover wounds, but you can increase that to a 5-up. It will not die, to recover hull points. And then if you chuck Ferrous Manus in it and stack it all, you can get that up to a 4-up. It will not die, making their vehicles very resilient as well. So here's the vehicle pool. Here is my heavy slot, including 2 Leviathan Dreadnoughts, 2 Derrideo Dreadnoughts, and an entire Volkite team here. But Winters, you can only take 3 heavies. Why did you make so many heavies? Well, there's 2 reasons for that. One, Land Raiders and Spartans can be taken as dedicated transports, and most of the time when you are taking a Land Raider or a Spartan, they're a dedicated transport to some Terminators or to some elites. And if you bring them as dedicated transports, then it allows you to squeeze out some more tanks here or there. And the second reason is, while the game is set up for 3,000 points, that's how many points you're supposed to play with according to Games Workshop, I often play at 5,000 points or higher. And when you're playing at 5,000 points or higher, then you're going to need to add to the force organization slot. You're going to need to either double it, or you're going to need to bring more heavies, more elites, more... It's hard to play big point games sticking to the force org slot. And at 9,600 points worth of Iron Hands, yeah, I've played with high numbers quite a few times. There's also a third reason. It's called the Armored Spearhead Right of War, where you can take a standard Sakaran and then you can take Land Raiders as dedicated transport slots wherever you would normally take Rhinos, and then you chuck in your Sakaran, you check in your Land Raiders, and then that unlocks more heavy slots. You're not supposed to be able to take this particular Sakaran, but we house ruled it to say that you can when we do it round here. For the purposes of filming on the channel, though, I really should get a standard Sakaran to take as that HQ to unlock the Armoured Spearhead Right of War. But tanks are resilient in the Iron Hands, so I wanted lots of tanks. You had to have a Spartan, you had to have a couple of Land Raiders. The reason why I ended up with 3 Land Raiders is because I got that box set with the Land Raiders and the Derrideos and Mark III armor in it, so we ended up with 3. And then in the tank slot, I feel like one of the best heavy support choices. There's 2 really good heavy support choices that you guys can pick out there. And one is Vindicators. These guys are good because their hulls are reinforced. Obviously, if you take, just like Spartans and Land Raiders, if you take extra hits on Rhinos and Sakarans and Predators, they can be shaken and stunned easily and reduced to snap firing. But Legion of Vindicators cannot be stunned or shaken. Well, they can't be reduced to snap firing. Stunned will still stop them moving. But they're a very, very good choice if you're looking for one thing to add to your heavy slot. And the guns are really good. Strength 9, AP 1, ordnance shots, awesome. The other really good choice to stick in the heavy slot I found is 2 Derrideo Dreadnoughts. Of course, they come in different flavors, but I found the plasma carronade ones really, really good. The one thing they can't hurt is tanks, but they're really good at killing infantry, elites, things like that. And if they stand still with their their targeting array thing, I forget what it's called. It's impossible to say. But if they stand still, they get a free interceptor reaction. And then, of course, you want Leviathan Dreadnoughts as well. Leviathan Dreadnoughts, what's not to love? Well, they're very slow. That bit I don't love. But they're big and chunky and absolutely terrifying and very resilient in an Iron Hands list with that -1 strength when they get shot at. And of course, I magnetized all the weapons options on the Leviathans and the Contemptors. Where the vehicles can have dozer blades, they have dozer blades. The Spartans and the Land Raiders all have additional las cannons putting in there, and these guys, the multi-melters pintled, that one, a multi-melter pintled. It makes the Land Raiders and the Spartans more expensive, particularly when you put the flare shield on the Spartan, but you must always put the flare shield on the Spartan. Pay those 50 extra points to make it basically armor 15 on the front. And the Predators, I magnetized the turrets as well, but I really like the Magnum Melter cannons. I mean, twin linked on the central turret is really tasty, and Armor Bane kicks in at 18 inches. These guys wreck stuff. And they're relatively cheap for what they do, but if you're thinking about getting heavies and you haven't got any heavies yet, and the choice is Vindicators or Predators, go for the Vindicators. Vindicators are just more resilient with their extra hull point and reinforced hull, and they're around the same points costs as 2 Predators. Starting off in the elite slot is 5 Contemptor Dreadnoughts, and yeah, here's a sample of all the arms that I magnetized for them. Lots of different arms. As everyone knows, Contemptor Dreadnoughts are strong in Iron Hands, even stronger when you shoot them with the -1 strength, and this would unlock the Fury of the Ancients Rite of War, where I can take that guy with the special Iron Hands thing as the HQ, and then 4 of the Contemptor Dreadnoughts as scoring. Some people say they're broken. They're not broken. Phalanx blades on World Eaters are broken. The Sagan Mazam thing for White Scar's Rite of War is broken. These guys are just undercosted. If they started at around 250 points rather than just south of 200 points a pop, then I don't think anyone would complain about them as much as they do. People don't typically say that Leviathans are broken or Derrideos are broken, because these guys I feel like they're appropriately costed. But these guys are a little bit too cheap for what they do. Then further down in the elite slot, I've got 30 Terminators, 10 Cataphractii Terminators, 10 Tartarus Terminators, and 10 Gorgon Terminators, the Iron Hand specific Terminator stuff. I needed all the Terminators for when I'm doing Pride of the Legion Rite of War. You can make these 2 guys over here score, and suddenly you're bringing a lot of Terminators along. Doing Pride of Legion, Cataphractii absolutely need a Spartan because they can't run and their movement reactions are slower. So they must go in a Spartan, whereas your Tartarus, they can run around all over the place. Gorgon Terminators have a 5-up invulnerable save as well, but they count as heavy. But they have a 5-up feel no pain and some nice rules. I've just given them all axes except for the Hammer Bearer and the Gorgons, whereas these guys have an array of weapons. And Iron Hands want to be shot at. They don't want to be in close combat because then they don't get any of their Legion benefits. So in the elite slot as well, there's a Rapier Carrier team with the las cannon destroyers, and these things are not even available on the Games Workshop website right now. I mean, Horus Heresy collectors out there. I went on there the other day to try and get some HQ things to add to my next project, and I think the first 10 out of the 70 plus choices in the HQ slot were available for sale, and the other 60 HQ slots on the Games Workshop official website were not available. Horus Heresy collectors know it's almost impossible to collect Horus Heresy effectively because the system has been a massive success. They're selling more and it's being played more than AOS, and they just can't keep up. Also in the elite slot, we have triple Apothecaries and triple Tech Marines. Apothecaries make your infantry more resilient and Tech Marines make your tanks more resilient. Then also in the elite slot, we have 45 Medusan Immortals. And I say they're in the elite slot because there is a Rite of War called Company of Bitter Iron, where you can take these in the troop slot and they gain line. So I've done that quite a few times. They're very, very expensive. There's like 45 in here, and it's 1,100 points for all of these guys with all the graviton weapons chucked in there. Very, very expensive, but very resilient. and you can switch all their bolters for chainswords. So I've done that. And wherever you can take a graviton weapon, I've put in graviton shredders. That's a Iron Hands unique grav weapon. Grav weaponry really hurts dreadnoughts and tanks because it has the haywire rule, but typically it's heavy. If you move, you can't fire it, but Iron Hands has access to graviton shredders, which means you can move and fire them. They have an assault, they gain the assault keyword. A bit more expensive than normal graviton guns, but you can move and shoot with them. And the Gorgon Terminators, well, they're one of the only units of Terminators where you can take grav weaponry as well. So I've sprinkled 3 grav weapons in there. So as well as Pride of the Legion, Fury of the Ancients, I can do the Company of Bitter Iron Rite of War quite solidly with this number of Medusan Immortals. Then in the troop slot, we have 50 infantry, just tactical marines. We have a unit of tactical support marines with plasma. We have a unit of snipers because snipers are good. You want to get them in any legion that you have. And I was very tempted to make this a 10-man squad of snipers and stick an apothecary in there. That's probably what you want to do if you're collecting a smaller collection of Iron Hands. Have a 10-man squad with an apothecary in there because they're going to be sticking around for a lot of the game with that -1 strength that comes through to them when they get shot at. But I only did 5 because I've got 20 plus in my Raven Guard force. So if I want to play with snipers, I do Raven Guard, but having some snipers in the Iron Hands felt right, and I think snipers in any Legion force is a good addition. That rounds out the heavy slot, the elite slot, and the troop/elite slot. You'll notice that there isn't any fast attack choices anywhere in my Iron Hands collection, and it's just south of 10,000 points already. I didn't want to add any fast. I've got a few fast again in the Raven Guard force, and what I wanted was infantry and tanks and dreadnought. I felt that that was very Iron Handsy. So I deliberately stayed away from the fast slot. I also deliberately stayed away from bringing assault marines, which can count as troops, and have Iron Hands with jump packs jumping around all over the place because I didn't feel that was very Iron Handsy. I didn't want to bring any breachers along because I got a chunk of Immortals, which are essentially the Iron Hands breachers, sort of. I want each of my legions to closely represent what they look like in the Black Library books, and so I've got a lot of elites in the Emperor's Children stuff. Got loads of infantry heavy in the Death Guard, lots of fast attack in the Raven Guard. Iron Hands, you want troops and tanks, I feel like. I also didn't want them combat dropping out of aircraft or drop pods. I don't see that in the books very often either. Then, of course, by adding different types of units and playing with the Force Org differently from my other legions means the Iron Hands feel significantly different from the other legions that I've already collected. Playing with my Iron Hands feels a long, long way from playing with my Raven Guard. And yes, of course, part of that is because of what each legion does, but also part of that is because of how I chose to be very specific with my collection. In the HQ slot, or Lord of War technically, we have Ferrus Manus, who didn't feature in the Horus Heresy very much, but he's an absolute unit at toughness 7 with a 3-up invulnerable save and Forge Breaker. That hammer is brutal 3 and non-unwieldy. What an absolute boss. Strength 12, AP 1, and then Perturabo grabs it later. The very same hammer on Perturabo's datasheet is still strength 12, AP 1, but it's brutal 2, not brutal 3, and it's unwieldy in Perturabo's hands because he hasn't practiced it for as long as Ferrus Manus has. And remember, Ferrus Manus, he was the third found son. He was around for a very long time, highly respected by his brothers. With a flat 3-up invulnerable save and with that brutal 3 hammer, he is one of those Primarchs that other Primarchs are scared of, but he is heavy, he can't run, so he's a wrecking ball that you just send up the battlefield and just go to town swinging with his hammer. And here's the remainder of my HQ slots. We have Shadrach Medusan. Shadrach Medusan's absolutely cool. They also, at the time of filming, recently released another Iron Hands Praetor, one of the generic ones, which I'm going to have to get, and I'm going to have to add to this HQ pool here. But Shadrach Medusan, once in a battle, he can declare a war, and the entire army gets Furious Charge and Hatred. He's cool. We have a banner. You have to have a herald. The herald works for sticking in with any unit of Terminators, but having a herald with a banner as well also works when you want to bring a 5-man command squad. And instead of a herald, you just stick the banner bearer in there as a command squad. There's 3 at the back. These 2 guys, a Cataphracti Praetor with lightning claws and a standard Praetor with lightning claws, Mechadendrite hives. These 2 guys are basically Forge Fathers with the Mechadendrite hives. And this guy here can also count as a Forge Father, or you could count them as Forge Lords, because Forge Lords have access to Mechadendrite hives as well. Extra attack, Battlesmith, Shred, AP2, all unwieldy, but with a pair of lightning claws makes him absolute beast. For example, on Praetor he has 4 attacks, pair of lightning claws gets into 6 attacks, Mechadendrite hive gets you up to 8 attacks. Crazy stuff. We have an apothecary, not an apothecary, Primus Medicae in Cataphracti armor. He's the only one I've got so far. Sticking a Cataphracti, feel no pain dude in a unit of Terminators, it initially felt a bit broken, but Terminators are typically not shrugging off bolter fire, Volkite fire, plasma fire. Most of the time they're shrugging off anti-tank weaponry. So sticking him in with a unit of Terminators, he's not as effective as you think he would be, because Terminators are taking anti-tank fire. These 2 fellas here can count as any type of Centurion I want to. Typically a chaplain, and one I gave a shield for when I want to chuck them in with all the immortals, and one I just gave a close combat weapon and a pistol and things. Then we have this model here, which you'd think would be a Praetor, and on the Games Workshop website it says a Praetor, but he's loaded up with weaponry that he cannot take in this edition. The only thing that can take a servo arm is the Moritat, I think. So he's essentially the Moritat, the guy who runs around with a dreadnought. So we have Praetor options, the banner options, we have Centurion options, and my entire army, I made sure every single model had their helmet on, because the flesh is weak, and Iron Hands, they'll keep their helmets on, except for my HQ slots. These guys, most of them have their helmets off, except for him. That way it's better when they're shouting and screaming at all the troops around them. Shadrach's model is just, this new model, he's got all the grenades, is just so very cool. Obviously there's a couple of other bits that would fit really well in an Iron Hands collection, such as artillery in the backfield shelling down. But all these heavy slots here are available in plastic, and it's really hard to collect Horus Heresy, so no artillery in the backfield. Just tanks instead that I could collect, that I could get. A Typhon and a Cerberus would work very well, or some other Lord of War, but I've got Typhons and Cerberuses in other collections that I have. And I want to make the Iron Hands feel different, as I said earlier, and Javelins as well would work well in Iron Hands, but I've got like 6 of them in my Raven Guard. So as I mentioned, one of the Legion-specific rights of war for the Iron Hands is the Company of Bitter Iron, where these immortals count as infantry. The other one is, I forget what it's called, but you can take Castellax along from the Mechanicum collection in your elite slot. Chuck in a Forge Lord with a Mechadendrite hive as well, and he can take Thalax along in the elite slot, and Thalax have line, and they can score. And I have ran that list a couple of times as well, Iron Hands and Mechanicum mixed together, because I've got about 6,000 points of Mechanicum, and it works quite well. The Iron Hands were the only legion that were floating through the galaxy with an entire Mechanicum arc fleet coming along with them. They worked hand in hand with the Mechanicum throughout the Great Crusade and invented many of the weapons that the other legions use, such as Cataphracti Plate, the Thunderhammer. Ferrus Manus invented Thunderhammers. Mechanicum and Iron Hands were best buddies, so if you wanted to, you could do 50-50. You could collect some Mechanicum, which is now available in plastic, and some Iron Hands, and smash together the second Rite of War as well. Another thing I wanted to do when I started collecting Iron Hands is I wanted them to look Iron Handsy, with lots of conversion bits on them. So this Immortal Sergeant here with his craggy shoulder pad, the Legion-specific icon, the servo skulls, the arm over his back shield, and the boarding shield, and the helmet, all of those extra bits come from marchofwar.co.uk. I wanted to break up the profile of the Iron Hands so they didn't look entirely generic, and I think that worked. All the lovely resin bases also come from marchofwar.co.uk. And then one of the other things I did, because the Iron Hands colour scheme is very, well, there's not a lot of colours in it. It's black and silver everywhere. So that's why we've got all these yellow and orange tufts of grass all over the place to give some colour, to give some pop to the army. Also, the craggy rocks they're stood on are lighter by design. If you're painting dark miniatures, you want lighter bases to make the dark miniatures pop. And if you're painting really bright miniatures, you want them on darker bases. I did do a tutorial on basing, how I did the bases, and I did a tutorial on how I painted the Iron Hands as well. If you want to check it, it's in the back catalogue words. In the end, just south of 10,000 points of Iron Hands painted and collected in the year. I'm rather proud of myself, particularly when I had a few other projects that I rounded out in 2024 as well. 2025 is going to be a little bit different though. I want to add a few bits back into the Raven Guard and Emperor's Children Force for 30k. And then there's a few bits that I need, some Guard and some Necrons that I want to add to my 40k force. And then once all that's done, the next Legion I'm going to be collecting is Night Lords. I've got all the Legions from Isfahan 3. I'm making my way through Isfahan 5 now. Raven Guard, Iron Hands and Night Lords were on Isfahan 5. So do you collect Iron Hands? What are your favourite units and what would you add to your Iron Hands force? Do you think I'm missing a trick? Is there a unit that I definitely should add? And if you're starting your Horus Heresy journey, well, you can't really go wrong with Iron Hands. They've got a lot of different builds and their Legion trait is very strong. They also have a tragic story and a dark story. And that's what we like about the Horus Heresy, the tragedy and the darkness. Because in the grim darkness of the 31st millennium, there is only war.